right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Hot Glass Amphitheater here at the Corning Museum of Glass, and welcome to everybody joining us on the web as well. For those of you in our in-person audience here, if you weren't aware, we are live streaming this program, so you are on the internet, and we have an incredibly unique opportunity today. The craft of making glass prosthetic eyes has been around since about the early 1600s, and it's a really unique niche in the world of glass making. And you talk to glassmakers around the world, and most have very little idea what goes on in the practice of prosthetic eye making. And there are, we think, less than 100 prosthetic glass eye makers in the world right now. Most prosthetic eyes nowadays are made with synthetics. So very unique opportunity here, and I would like to introduce you to our special guest, Milena Buckel. And Milena is joining us from Switzerland, and she is a Swiss artist and ocularist who lives and works in Sion in the Swiss Alps. She first obtained a bachelor's degree in visual arts at HEA, and later completed a performance in contemporary science arts degree. Her artistic practice oscillates between performance, installation, and drawing. She's a member of Marie Louise, a collective of illustrators and artists who focus on site-specific drawing. In 2014, Milena and her sister Marina decided to train with their father, Matthias, who was one of the last ocularists, or ocular prosthetists, to work exclusively with blown glass from the Lauscha glassworks in Germany. And we'll get into a little more of where the materials come from and how specialized they are as we go along here. So in 2022, Milena opened her own practice in Sion. She also travels regularly to Lausanne and around the French-speaking parts of Switzerland to see her patients closer to their homes. Perpetuating the tradition, Milena always travels with her grandfather's portable workbench. The Buckel daughters work with several hundred patients from Switzerland and abroad. So a little bit about the history of prosthetic eyes. The earliest known prosthetic eye that has been discovered to this point was uncovered in southeastern Iran back in 2006. And it was worn by a woman that historians think may have been a priestess. And it was worn on the outside of the eye, a piece of stone that was decorated with gold. And then there were threads that would sort of hold it over the eye socket. So that goes back to 2900 BCE, so first prosthetics. And we don't hear too much about prosthetic eyes between that time period and as we get into the late 1500s, early 1600s, we start to hear about other prosthetic eyes. There was a French military surgeon, Ambroise Paré, who published a book about prosthetics he had developed for military injuries. And that book came out in 1579. So descriptions of metal eyes that had different types of straps to hold them to the face. We start to hear about glass prosthetic eyes with Venetian glassmakers in the early 1600s. But while they were making decent prosthetics, they were very fragile. And also the glass they were using didn't hold up very well with exposure to tears. That glass would actually start to deteriorate and break down. We'll get into that a little bit more as we go along. So we've got Venetian glassmakers making glass eyes in the early 1600s. Then we start to hear about some French glassmakers who are also making prosthetic glass eyes later into the 1600s through the 1700s. But really the biggest advancements in glass eye making occurred in that town of Lauscha that I mentioned a moment ago. Lauscha is a small town in the Thuringian Mountains, which is sort of northeast Germany. And they have a long history of glassmaking there. The town was actually founded in 1579 by two families of glassmakers. They were looking for a new area to set up a glass factory. There are great forests, very dense forests in the Lauscha area, and also sand in the riverbeds that has a very good silica content to it. So it made sense as a good glassmaking center. In the mid-1700s, Lauscha had so much glass to make and such limited space in their factories that we started to see what we call a cottage industry breakout. So all of a sudden, glassmakers are working out of their homes, and they're working on lamps rather than out of furnaces. So they've got a smaller heat source. They can work right out of their homes. Suddenly, the whole town is glassmakers again. And Lauscha became famous as the origin point for the Christmas ornament. We did a program on Christmas ornaments a few years back, and it got pretty deep into that history. They also were known for making different medical devices and also eyes for dolls and teddy bears. So in 1822, there was an ophthalmologist in Würzburg, Germany, who was looking for better prosthetics for his patients. They were still getting these prosthetics from the French glassmakers, and they were okay, but this gentleman knew there could be improvements made. So Professor Heinrich Edelmann from Würzburg approached a glassmaker in Lauscha. His name was Ludwig Müller-Uri. Müller-Uri had experience as a glassmaker, particularly making eyes for dolls and for teddy bears. And so Professor Edelmann approached him and asked him to work on new prosthetics to improve the conditions for his patients. And so Müller-Uri is given a whole lot of credit for really advancing the craft of glass eye making. He developed a better process for making better details, more accurate details to the eyes. He also worked with the local glass chemists in town to develop better formulas for glass that held up better under the conditions that the glass is exposed to when it's worn. And later in the 1800s, about 1885, descendants of Müller-Uri developed a very specific glass formula that is what Milena is using today. So those two families that initially settled in Lauscha, one family were the Müllers, the other were the Greiners, which I don't know if you know that was quite the case. So we've got Ludwig Müller-Uri, so clearly descended from the Müller line. Now, the first glass eye maker in Milena's family is Ernst Greiner, who is your great-great-uncle. Yep. And so we see descendant from the Greiner family. And so Ernst moved to Geneva, Switzerland in 1896 to set up his ocularist practice. And by 1951, your grandfather, Werner Buckel, took over the business in Geneva. And your father, Matthias, then took over the business in 1985. And now you have opened your own practice. So you're the fourth generation of ocularists in your family. So there's our little setup of some of the history of prosthetic eyes. And Milena, we'd love to hear a little more from you about your practice and what you'd like to share with us.
Can you hear me? Yeah. Thank you very much, Eric. And first, I would like to say that I'm very happy and honored also to be here and to see such a beautiful crowd. And also, I know that there are people watching us on the internet. We are used to make demonstrations, but never with so many people. So I'm really glad you are here and interested in what we are doing. Thank you. I guess for the history and the history of glass prosthetics and of my family, there's not much left to say because you really resumed everything very good. Thanks very much. So I think maybe I will just go into the subject and explain to you first when a glass eye is needed and how it works, and then I will explain to you the material I'm working with, the glass and the other clamps and so on, and then I will show you how a glass eye is made. So, as you can expect, a person will need a glass eye when there is the loss of one or the two eyes. That will occur if you have a congenital illness or when you have an illness or an accident. Accidents and illnesses are half-half of the reasons to replace an eye. A very important thing to say is that prosthesis isn't round. That's the question everyone asks all the time. And in fact, I will show you maybe to begin how the form of a prosthesis is. So I brought here, it's a tiny, tiny, tiny box. Usually I have much bigger boxes with lots of samples. And I think, Eric, if you want to go through.
That would be great.
Yeah, so there are two forms of prosthetics glass eyes. You have the first one that was discovered was what's so-called in German Schale, which means shell, and it's a single layer of glass. It's very thin. Very often I like to talk about what I'm doing like big contact lenses, because it's really what it looks like. And then the other form is called in German Reformbulbus, which is a double-layered shell. And that was the one of the discoveries of the first glass blowers in Lauscha. With this double layer of glass, you can actually play with the thickness of the prosthesis and replace the loss of the material in the orbitary cavity. You have a okay, sorry. Once a person has the loss of an eye, usually there will be a surgery made by an ophthalmologist, and 2 to 4 weeks after the surgery, the person will come to us and we will make a bespoke ocular prosthesis. The aim of the prosthesis is a medical one, but also a general comfort one. Medical because with the prosthesis, the cavity will be filled with something. It protects the cavity from dust. And it helps that the eyelids have their function again. Because when there is no prosthesis, then the eyelids cannot close very well because there is no smooth surface for them to get onto. And that helps also to have a good tear flow, which is really a problem when you lose one eye. And the other aim, the general comfort, is rather for the self-esteem of a person, because as you know, when we talk to each other, usually we look into each other's eyes, and the eyes are in the center of the face. So yeah, we know it's something very important. And usually with a prosthesis, the result is pretty good. And most of our patients, you cannot see that they are wearing a prosthesis. Yeah, and so when a person comes to us for the first time, I will have a box like the one Eric is showing to you with lots of samples in form. I will have a look at the person's cavity to see how much space there is. I will select 2 or 3 forms, try them on, see which one is the best, the most comfortable for the patient, and then I will make one for that person, correcting everything, making that the iris is well-centered, and so on. And for the color, it's more or less the same thing. I have a little box with the color samples. Usually our eyes are brown, which is the most common color then you have blue, and then green. And this is also a very tiny, tiny box. Usually I have a big box with like 70 eyes in it. And yeah, so I have those samples. And I will also select 2 or 3 matching the color of the person, and I will get from that base to make the specific color for the person. I don't know if you... That's a try. Can you have that image on the... If you can see it. Ah, that's great. You can see it more or less, I think, no? So just that you get an idea. Here is an eye, and on the image left, you can see that the cornea, so the transparent layer which comes above our color, is quite thick. And I will reproduce that at the end of the process of the color to make everything smooth and to give a good a good impression to the color. It will make it more profound. And next to that, you have the color of an eye, so you can see the basis color. And then comes the iris, which is those little filaments like a star. And then the iris in the middle. Around the iris, you have something that's called a sphincter, and that helps close the iris. It's like a muscle, and it's colored. And this will be very important when I do the prosthesis, because to do that, I use very soft and transparent glass, which is very smooth, and it will make the surface smooth, and then I can come with my black pupilla on top of it, and that will allow that the pupilla is really round and regular and perfect. And the other thing I wanted to mention is the color around the iris. You can see here it's written Limbus. That is a color that transitions between the sclera, the white of the eye, which, by the way, is very important too, because we don't have all the same eye white. Some of them are more yellowish, reddish, blue, and yeah, that's very important too. And so the limbus is the transition from the sclera to the iris, and it's a bit, it's not very sharp. It's something a bit smooth, and you can reproduce that very well with glass, and this is important also to have a realistic look. Yep. Thank you. Okay. I think I go ahead with the material. Is that okay?
Absolutely.
Can you understand me? Okay. I must admit that it would be easier for me in French, but it's a really good training. So many people and in English, so yeah. Okay. So for the material, usually I have a wooden working bench, and on the surface, for me, it's quite important that it's dark, so I can see a good contrast with the white of the prosthesis. And I mention it for who might be interested, because I was looking for the exact material quite a long time, and I found that anodized aluminum surface is a good one, because it's soft, so the glass won't break on top of it. And it's well matte and not brilliant, and yeah, it's perfect. Then the centerpiece is my very special bench burner. It's one made by one company in Germany called Arnold, and this is a bench burner really made just for prosthetic glass eye makers. it works on a very low temperature, which is 6 to 800 degrees Celsius, which makes 1,100 to 1,500 degrees Fahrenheit, which is very low for glass working. And I only work with propane or butane glass and some air. Very often glass blowers work with oxygen, but that would be too much for me. I really need a small temperature, a small flame, because the glass I'm working with is very soft. And if I have a too hot flame, that everything will melt down much too quick. Then I have some special clamps. I just took some of them with me. Some of them belong to my grandfather. Some others were my dad's. And at one point, my dad had to let's do some new ones. Or he took some from people doing jewelry, and he adapted them a little bit. So it's basically metal, very often aluminum, and wooden. This wooden piece, because this won't get heated. So this is to take. This one is the one I use most, and that one is a very thin one I use for working the single-layered shells. And I just take the shell in between of the two clamps. Yeah, and then I have, I think it's called a vernier caliper. Maybe you know that from your chemistry lessons and so on. This is to have the good diameter of the prosthesis. I'm always working with a model. So, or it's a new model I find for the person, or the person, when she comes back, then I will copy that model. And this is a dry point compass, which I use to make the measurements. Also, I can open it, close, yeah. And also this other compass, with that here, I can turn to, this one I use for the diameter of the iris, which will always be between 11, 12 millimeters. But I don't know how much it will be here. It's tiny. Okay, and one little thing that's an invention of my grandfather, so I like to mention it. It's just a silicone rod. Usually when you see glass blowers making glass eyes, they will always blow directly in the tube and the prosthesis like that. But we cheat a little, and we use that rod. And I went to a colleague in Germany, and he was very happy to discover that, because he is a bit, when you cannot see very well close. So he was very happy to see that, to be able to still work. Yeah. And then there's also something, we don't have an annealer, so which will rewarm the glass. We have like a cooling oven. I don't have one here. It's just to bring the prosthesis gently cooling down and avoiding its breakage. But you don't necessarily have to use it. And now the glass. I will explain that, and then after that I will show to you how it works. and go to the more concrete stuff. So, as you can see here, we have different tubes, glass tubes, and this one is the very special glass that was, in fact, all the glass we are still working with is made in Lauscha, which is rather than a town, it's a tiny village where there are lots of glass blowers, and my father's family comes from there. There's still the factory we are working with. It's the only one in the world that has the recipe for that glass. And this is the Cryy glass. If you see, for example, on that one, you will see that it can be very white or very transparent. And I can play with that also when I'm doing the prosthesis. This will be the base, and I will paint everything on top of that. So the white will be the sclera of the eye. Then I have some base color rods. Usually it will be blue, brown, purple. And that's the outside color of the eye. Then I have the iris colors. I will take some here. This one we make ourselves. So those are like twisted rods, and these twisted colors will make the design of the iris. Then I have some transparent rods I use to make the sphincter, that transparent thing underneath the pupilla. And then I have, it's a simple black rod. And the crystal glass rod here, which I use to make the cornea and make everything smooth. I think that's it. And then the blood vessels, which are very important, as I said. Some people have more vessels or less. Children tend to have more blue. Older people, it's often a bit more yellow. And those colors we do also. The red one, for example, is it's the most expensive color. It's gold ruby glass covered with cryolite, so it's very precious. And I think here we are. I have spoken enough, so for the moment, so I will show you now the steps. Maybe if you have some questions, keep them for the end, because while I'm working, very often I'm a bit concentrated. Maybe Eric, he will come to me sometimes when I explain what I'm doing. And if I don't answer, it's just that I'm too concentrated. I don't want to be rude.
Sounds perfect. Thank you. All righty. So we'll dive into the hotter action here now. I'm going to grab some safety glasses. So Milena was mentioning her torch being fairly unique, and we spent a couple hours this morning trying to tune it in. It runs on very low pressures, about a ½ pound of gas per square inch, and I think the air pressure is around a ½ pound as well. And our regulators for what we typically do here can barely even measure that low. So it was quite an adventure getting things tuned in. And we also realized that since that flame has so little pressure behind it, the little breezes around this studio here were really affecting the flame as well. That's why we've got the barrier to seal Milena in there. hopefully the breezes don't affect things. Yeah, so we typically run our flameworking torch up in the demo booth here on about 40 pounds of oxygen and 15 pounds of gas, and yeah, it's quite a bit different. So this is the cryolite glass, and grab my notes here again. Cryolite is a mineral that is found around Lauscha, and it's made up of sodium, aluminum, and fluoride. And I mentioned, as I was talking about the history of things a little bit, that the earlier glasses that were being used for prosthetic eyes, the Venetians were using a lead glass, and with exposure to tears, that glass starts to deteriorate. So you've got this prosthetic that's getting a rough surface. Milena mentioned how the smooth surface is so important. Well, imagine blinking your eye consistently over a rough piece of glass. Eventually you're going to get irritated, probably infected, and you've already had an issue with your eye that required a prosthetic, and all of a sudden you've even irritated it more. So this specific glass was a huge revolution for this industry. And all of a sudden you've got a much more comfortable prosthetic for patients. And for all the flame workers watching, you'll notice it's a very different range of flames and very different look to those flames than what we're used to with those of us who work with borosilicate on the torch. We have to run much hotter. The flame is a much brighter blue. So she's inflating the glass, starting to set up the basic form that she'll start to decorate on top of here. It can be hard enough to work in someone else's studio when you're really used to your own, but when your torch is running a little differently, that's a whole other level of challenge. So this demo has been a long time in the making as well. Milena first reached out to me in 2019, towards the end of 2019, and they were planning to come here in 2020, so we're all excited trying to develop a plan for the fall of 2020. You can imagine how that went. And then we were waiting for another opportunity for her to potentially come to the States, and it looked like maybe 2022 that could happen. That didn't quite work out. So here we are 5 years later from initial contact, and we've persevered through a pandemic and gotten you here to show us this amazing craft. So she's inflating a little bit. She's sort of built out almost like a football sort of form, or American football form, and she blows out the tip of that form even a little bit more. So it's a little thinner. It's also sort of pronounced away from the rest of the form. And now she can start to decorate that. So this is the base color for the background of the iris. She mentions she has some softer colored glasses and some stiffer ones. This is one of the softer ones that's used for the background. And this will also give the coloring for the slightly different color that's around the outer edge of the iris where it meets the sclera, where it meets the white. So as she's adding that bit of glass, she's blowing a little bit as well. Part of what she will continually do is keep an air cavity in behind the layers of color that she's adding. So by keeping that air cavity behind the color work, she can keep it fairly thin so you don't wind up with a big thick spot in the center of the prosthetic. And it also allows her to make a really intricate pattern. She's really watching the glass as she's inflating it, which is a great advantage to having the blow hose there. I've been fortunate enough to see a couple other ocularists work in Lauscha, and they both blew through the glass, which means you can't really see what is inflating. The hose makes a lot of sense. We see a lot of flame workers in other aspects of the flame working world using a blow hose, but this is a fairly different thing for ocularists. So now she's going to start to really decorate the iris. This is one of the canes that she had twisted the colors. So when we look at the canes themselves, the colors are, if my finger is the cane here, they're wrapped sort of perpendicular to the shape of the cane. As she's applying them, she's pulling a little bit, which is actually sort of straightening the lines. And that gives all those fine lines to what you see within an iris. And she'll do multiple layers of this. She will have some of these lines that come out to the very center of the iris. Some of them will work around maybe the midsection of the iris. There might be other touches of color that are on the outer edges of the iris. And the glasses that are used for the iris canes, for those twisted canes, are very stiff. They're, the company calls them bone glass. And they happen to be extremely stiff, while that background color that she initially added is very soft. Having those different viscosities, those different stiffnesses of glasses, lends itself really well to the fine detail of what an iris should look like. If you've ever had a chance to see an iris, like a microscopic image or a really magnified image of an iris, it looks very three-dimensional. There's a lot of sort of contour to it. Having these different viscosities, these different stiffnesses of glasses, helps the glass to mimic that effect of the different dimensionalities in there. And that's the outer edge color? All right.
Because the iris color isn't very, it's irregular. So that will make it regular, and yeah, that's one reason.
Okay. So this is the sphincter part that she was talking about around the iris, that is going to sort of bring everything to more regular proportion. Aha, excellent. I had a feeling we might get a question like that. So we've got a question from the web. When you're comfortable answering it, yeah, folks are wondering what is it you look at your patient's eye that then determines what colors you're choosing for the different canes? It's probably a detailed question or a detailed answer.
Maybe can I have
Yeah.
So, well, that's a very interesting question. It drove me crazy when I asked my father how to reproduce a color, and his answer was, I just have to try and figure out myself, more or less. And yeah, I was a bit mad at him because I didn't know how to start. But with the years, I understood that it's really the truth. And well, people will have brown, blue, green, gray eyes, but it's always a bit a tendency, and each eye color is very different. And so I just have to make it in a way that it has the same impression than the other eye. And which I think is also interesting. My father and I would often disagree on the color of the person's eye. And I think it's not very important because in the end, the result was maybe different from him to me, but both were okay. And yeah, I don't know if it answers. It's not very precise, but yeah.
So the answer is magic? Is it? Yeah, okay, perfect.
I think eyes are magic.
Yeah, Milena's saying eyes are magic, which I would have to agree there.
Maybe I can add something. I'm also quite happy because when I started, I was a bit afraid of when speaking to people, just watching their eyes color and not hearing what they were saying. And fortunately, that was never the case. It happens to me sometimes to find a color really beautiful and to ask myself how I would make it, but I'm not obsessed with that, so yeah.
I can definitely relate. We were doing our best to demonstrate eye making a few years ago in conjunction with an exhibit that we had here. And I noticed as we started developing and getting used to the process and really keying in on the details, I also would sort of stare into people's eyes, just kind of examining the eye, because your brain gets wrapped around that detail, and that's just what you do. I think it's similar in other types of sculpture as well. I know as I've developed figurative work, I watch people's body positions and how limbs move and all that sort of stuff. It makes sense. So she's added another layer of detail and melting it in, getting that surface homogeneous again.
That is the pupil.
And she's going to add the pupil now, so she's got a bit of very dense black glass to add. Just to make sure I don't forget, I want to thank our camera crew. You guys do such great work. This is amazing.
I don't know if you see it, but I'm a bit shaky today, but it's well centered, I think.
I agree. I wasn't going to say anything while you were placing it on there, but in my few attempts at putting a pupil in the center of an iris, was not particularly accurate. You nailed it. So we're going to add the clear over the top of everything here now. So as Milena mentioned earlier, the clear adds a smooth surface. It also magnifies what's under it a little bit and sort of gets the details of the iris to pop a little bit more. It's such a different temperature range than what most of us flame workers are used to. Seeing her work the tip of that little rod of clear there, it just barely wants to soften in that flame. Really allows her the control that she needs to be so precise. That camera actually has a better view than I do. That's amazing. Nice job, guys. So she adds enough clear to really cover the iris, but that's too much thickness. So she's going to start picking off some of that material. We have another question from the web. Some folks who joined late on the web are wondering what kind of glass this is. It is a grouping of glasses. The tubing has cryolite added to it. So we mentioned the mineral cryolite that has sodium and cryolite has sodium, aluminum, and fluoride in it. And then the different colored glasses are, I believe they're a soda lime base, but they also have a little bit of cryolite added to them as well. The clear, I believe, is a pretty straightforward clear 104 COE soda lime glass. The red for the blood vessels, this blew my mind a few years ago when I had to buy some of these supplies. It is by far the most expensive glass I'd ever purchased. When I was buying this stuff, I think about 8 years ago, it was 2,200 euro per kilo. So $1,000 a pound. Some of the most expensive colored glasses we're seeing in the borosilicate market now are maybe $160 a pound, which is even pretty high end in that market. So very specialized glass for the blood vessels. It is, as Milena mentioned earlier, it's a gold ruby. So gold rubies tend to be expensive. They use gold chloride, and they require very special handling. Gold rubies, if you heat them for too long, tend to get livery. They get really brown and sort of a reddish brown, not the bright red that you really need for a proper blood vessel for an eye. So they go through a very extensive process of heating the ingredients, letting them cool. Once they've gotten to a very specific point of melting, they cool it. They pull that glass out of the crucible, they heat it one more time very precisely to stretch it out into the canes. And if they heat for a little too long, if the process doesn't go just right, Milena doesn't have the right glass for the proper details. So it is a very precise bit of chemistry. It's also a very precise bit of handling to get that red glass just right. So there's a whole variety of different glasses in there. And there are, I can't remember exactly what the different viscosities all were, what all the different coefficients of expansion were. But I believe they range from about a 98 coefficient of thermal expansion, and there's even one of the glasses I think is in the 118 range of coefficient of thermal expansion. And I think a lot of our American flame workers are going to be really surprised that such a broad range of glasses can be used together, but they're formulated with viscosities that do work together. For those of you who don't understand that language of detail, as glass is heated, it swells. As it cools, it shrinks. We call that the coefficient of thermal expansion, the rate at which glasses move with temperature change. Typically, when we're working artistic glass, we want glasses that are within 3 points on that range. Anything beyond that 3 points, as the glass is cooling, they pull apart. They shrink at different rates. They pull apart and they crack. Well, if glasses have some different viscosities, even though they expand and contract a little differently with temperature, they might be a little softer or a little stiffer at that same temperature. So different glasses that may have different thermal expansions can actually be worked together in the right proportions and if the chemistries are just right. So that is the situation here. These are very unique glasses that were engineered over the course of decades to be able to fit just right. Yep. Or do you want me to? Okay, yep.
Okay, so now I will do the last step of the color, which is the Limbus. I will heat the crystal glass, so the transparent cornea glass, very strong, until you see the color just behind it, which is the base color, will get very orange, a very intense orange, which means everything is very hot. And then I will come with a cold crystal piece on top of the very hot crystal bubble and take it away from the color, and you will see that the orange circle is going to be a bit larger. And that is the process that makes the limbus, so this soft color transition. Yeah?
That's the transition in color from the iris into the sclera. Yeah. You can sort of see that extra bright halo around the outer edge of the iris where it's sort of meeting the sclera. So now she's going to remove the excess clear. We don't want a big thick chunk of clear stuck on the end. But she had to apply a wide enough mass to really cover the iris. And in doing so, you wind up with more thickness on it than you need. So now removing that. Prepping her calipers here to be able to measure the iris. We've definitely created some extra challenges here with the differing pressures than what Milena's used to. When a torch runs on such low pressure, it is extremely sensitive to every little change. So in removing the clear, she's also sort of got the iris pulling out a little bit into that clear. As she's been pulling material off, it has sort of pulled the iris and the pupil to a point in the center. As she's inflating, she's also sort of continuing to fill out an air cavity between all that detail so it doesn't get too thick. So, all right, I'm going to add the blood vessels now. And you've measured the iris. You're not going to change the size of the iris at this point, right? You're going to leave the size of that where it is, and you'll shape everything else, sort of the sclera to that.
Yes, but when as Eric mentioned, the flame setting is a bit different here from what I'm used to. So I will just put some blood vessels on top of the prosthesis so you can see how it works. But the idea is I work here with, to me, hot flame so that the blood vessels can very fusion pretty well into the sclera. Yeah, and once that's done, I will start and work the form of the prosthesis. And when I work the form, at that point, I can, I will correct the size of the iris. So now I have like a general size, but I will make it more precise afterwards.
Excellent, thank you. The adding of the blood vessels was one of my favorite things that I got to see with the other ocularists I've been fortunate enough to see. It's a very, very slick way of adding detail. So you can imagine the blood vessels, we want them tiny to look natural.
Yeah, I think it took me maybe 3 years to get it properly.
Wow. Milena says it took her about 3 years to really get proper with the blood vessels. So she pulls just a very thin bit of material, almost can't even see it. And this flame is just soft enough, or just hot enough that it can melt that tiny little thread of glass, but it's not hot enough to start distorting the shape of the eye. So she's just pulling these little tiny threads, and that flame is just right that you can sort of lay it through the flame and it sticks to the sclera. That glass is so thin, there's no trying to draw it on accurately. That's just not an option. So she sort of lays it in there and lets the glass do what it will do. So she works in a specific order with the colors. She added some of the yellow for the blood vessels first. From there, she might add some blue, and then eventually the red. And these are the level of detail we probably don't think very much about. Most of us think blood vessels, oh, that must just be red. But when you have to see the eye and the level of detail that an ocularist needs to see it in, all those fine details make a huge difference. And we haven't even really got into the psychology of the patient and the ocularist relationship and how that works. But you can imagine if you're missing an eye, you're disfigured, it's not an easy thing to be out in society with people maybe staring at you, kids snickering, whatever that may be. We communicate a lot with our eyes. Our eye contact makes a big difference in how we communicate. So if you're missing an eye, that is a big factor in the quality of your life. And to have an ocularist make a prosthetic that is really accurate, that people don't notice you've got a prosthetic, really makes a huge difference in the psyche of the patient. And Milena and I discussed that a little bit earlier. I've had similar discussions with some other ocularists as well. Not only do they have to be highly skilled in the glassmaking aspect of things, but they also have to be very effective at working with the patient and working with their psyche to help them through the process. And to have a really well-made prosthetic changes somebody's quality of life. It makes a huge difference.
Now I'm melting the veins into the layer.
Yep.
And I will start the global form and then the precise form.
All right, so she added those little stringers of the blood vessel colors on, but when she initially lays them on the sclera, they're just stuck to the surface. They're not really fused very well. So she's added some more heat, so everything's worked in. It's a nice uniform surface again. And as she gets those all worked in, now she can start to work on the more precise shaping and the sizing. I'm noticing most of that flame is focused on the sclera, not so much on the iris area. So I suspect that's where we want the most movement from the glass as she's inflating it.
I'm making the glass thinner also.
Mm-hmm. So in inflating, she's also making the glass thinner, very intentionally. So as we got into the history of prosthetic eyes, we sort of landed in Lauscha, Germany. So after all the work of Ludwig Müller-Uri, Germany became really the center for prosthetic glass eyes throughout the 1800s and well into the 1900s. Ocularists actually would come from Germany, even here to the US. They'd travel the world to work with patients. And of course, eventually folks in other parts of the world learned the process and learned to make prosthetics. But they were still using the materials that were coming out of Lauscha. Well, eventually, World War II breaks out, and we can't get products from Germany and many parts of the world. And there's a war going on, so of course soldiers need prosthetics as they get injured. And so the US government actually started a program to figure out a new material for these prosthetics because we couldn't fill the need here in the US. And what they landed on was acrylic. So nowadays, most prosthetic eyes around the majority of the world are acrylic, but countries that were still able to get the materials from Germany through that time period, and now many other countries, there are some folks still working in glass. And as we were talking earlier, we suspect there must be fewer than 100 ocularists working in glass around the world at this point, probably somewhere between 50 to 100. We know there are still several in Germany, of course, some Swiss ocularists. I think Milena mentioned you know of somebody in Ukraine. I know of somebody in the Czech Republic. We know of someone in England. So there are a few folks around the world still working with glass for prosthetics. And some folks are allergic to acrylic, so glass might be their only option. So there is still absolutely a need for that. And the glass versions are less expensive, I believe, than the acrylic ones as well. All right, so she's got things sized the way she wants. And we're going to start to move more towards the precise form of the finished prosthetic.
I will make a double shell.
And she's going to make the double shell version. So rather than just being a single surface, she is actually starting to inhale a little bit as she's heating the glass. She's trying to pull in the backside to create that second wall. So she's taking what was sort of a football shape, and as she heats very specific spots and sucks in, she will start to sort of create almost more of a potato chip sort of shape that will still be hollow in the middle. So why don't we pull one of these guys out here? We'll show you the different types. So we got a single wall, and we'll grab a double wall. So this is the single wall here, which as I flip this over, we see it is simply one surface of glass. So this would be just stripping off the front of the bubble that she's working on there, as opposed to the double wall here, which is a continuous hollow form all the way around. So it has that back surface as well. So part of the process for the surgery for a prosthesis, and please correct me if I mess any of this up, a synthetic ball is surgically attached to the back of the eye socket, to the muscles in the back of the eye socket. And so that takes up the better part of the cavity of the eye socket. And so what Milena needs to do is figure out the thickness of what goes in front of that, so that prosthetic fills the space between that ball that's been implanted and the orbital bone, so it holds in there. So if there's very little space between that ball and the orbital bones, you go with the single surface, the single shell. If it needs to occupy a little more space, then we want to go with the double wall, so it really fills that space properly and fits properly. Did I get that right? All right, learning. All right, we'll put these back where they're safe again. So just heating very specific areas. She sort of set up the overall outline of what the finished piece will be, and now she's sort of bringing in the material behind it. So one of the more common myths in the glass world is you can't inhale. Well, there are times where we very intentionally inhale. The heat does not come back through. It doesn't make it even through our big blowpipes when you see us blowing glass at the furnace. The heat doesn't make it back through. And there are times that we want a form that sort of folds back into itself. So we inhale to make that happen. There are different scientific apparatus that require that you inhale to sort of create a double-walled vessel form. Okay. So she sort of set up the outline of the finished front of the prosthetic. Now she's going to get a grip on that front section with her clamp tool here, or sort of a claw holder, if I can relate it to other flameworking tools. And she'll continue to heat and inhale to pull in that backside of the form. So she's sort of pulling excess away, inhaling a little bit to continue to sort of close in the backside.
At that point also I can make the sclera more white or transparent by putting it more in the flame.
It strikes. So Milena is adjusting the opacity of the sclera, of the white. When we looked at the tubing itself earlier, you could see most of the tube is transparent, and there was a more dense, opaque sort of stripe in the middle. Well, we can adjust that opacity with temperature. So as she's gently heating the glass, more of that white, more of that opacity is coming in. We tend to refer to that as striking, when we can get the glass to sort of change color as we heat it a little differently. And so just very gentle, precise heating and inhaling a little bit. Now, another thing she's taking advantage of is surface tension. As you heat glass, as it gets to a really softened state, it tries to pull itself together. So to create extra thickness, as she heats certain areas, she knows that glass is sort of pulling together and getting thicker in those spots. So that also helps her to control shape. It's really just working with the natural physics of the glass itself. So now the tube has gotten very, very narrow, where it still has an air cavity through there. And ultimately, this will be a completely sealed hollow form. Which may actually help with the strength of the object. It'll be under vacuum a little bit, so it's going to be a compressed form, which is going to give it a little extra strength. So sort of continuing to pull in the backside to create that really precise backside to the wall. So the tube keeps getting thinner and thinner. The backside keeps sort of getting closer and closer into shape here. Now she's removed the tube entirely. So we do have a sealed off hollow form. Just sort of fine-tuning that backside. So she's rewarming the whole thing here. She had most of the heat focused on the backside for a bit there. So just gently flashing that through the flame. And yeah, there we go. All right, nicely done. So let me maybe rotate that a little bit. Now, I imagine there must be some questions out there. Yes, sir. Let's get you the microphone. Did you hear the question? Okay.
Thank you for your question and your attention also. Sometimes when I was watching my father working in the flame, I kept falling asleep because it's so hypnotizing. So yeah, and I think no one is sleeping. So thank you. When for now, it's been 10 years since I started learning this process, and it's been 3 years, almost 3 years, since I opened my own studio. For now, I'm quite a junior ocularist, and I have to redo not every prosthesis, for God's sake, but it happens to me, when a color doesn't fit or the form won't be exact, then I have to redo the prosthesis. At some points, you can correct it. Basically, if I have to take something away a bit more, I can do it. If I have to add something or to change the color, that's not possible, and then I have to start again. The whole process for me at that point is more or less 2 hours, so I made it very quick now. I think in 20 years from now, maybe it will take me 1 hour. But working quickly is also not my goal at all. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
It does happen. It can be two things. It could be a bad fit. Usually, if the prosthesis is too small, then it will like float too much, and as soon as you scratch your eye or so, then or with some pressure from sneezing, it will turn. You can put it back in place quite easy, but it's not the goal. The other thing could be it's a bit too wide, and so it turns also. But it can also happen. It really depends on the situation. I don't know if he had an accident or an illness, but it depends how the operation was made and how it could be done. And it depends how much place you have in the cavity. Sorry? Yes, that's an important point. In fact, it's very important to take out the prosthesis to clean it. Some people do it every day, and others never do it, which is not the best option, but it works for them. They usually take it out once a month. I really like to talk about a big contact lens because it makes the things a bit more strange. And I don't know, for those of you who have contact lenses, it's more or less the same, except glass or plastic isn't soft, and so you can use those very special scleral cups. They are also specially made in the US for prosthesis prosthetics of the eye.
So for those of you on the web, the initial question that Milena started answering there, gentlemen in our crowd in house here, was it your grandfather that had the prosthetic eye, and if he would sneeze or move too quickly, it would shift in his socket. So that's what Milena has been answering here. Any other questions?
Maybe sorry, I just have a little detail. Very often people say that they wear a glass eye, but in fact, sometimes they don't know themselves. But very often, for example, in the US, there's nobody working with glass anymore. So it will be a plastic PMMA prosthesis, but we still call it a glass eye. Yeah. Yeah.
So hang on a moment. Just for the web, the question is, how does one clean a glass eye? So, yeah.
Thank you. Usually you will clean it just with some soap and water. Of course, you have to rinse it very well after that, and then you put some teardrops and back in the eye. If it can happen that a little bit of a deposit stays on the surface, and you can put that away just with the fingernails, because glass won't have. It's like when you have glass.
Eyeglasses.
Eyeglasses, thank you. They will not scratch that easy versus plastic. And it's a bit the same. Glass doesn't scratch if you go with the fingernail. There's the gentleman asked if it's the prosthesis is intended to last for a lifetime. So no. Glass prostheses have to be changed somewhere between every year until all 3 years. In Switzerland, the cost is taken over by health insurances, and people can change them every year. Most commonly, they would change them all 2 years. The reason is that the surface of the glass will get a bit altered by the teardrops, and something chemical happens, and so the surface isn't as smooth anymore, and you have to change it. It's no danger, it's just that it's not as smooth and comfortable at the beginning. And for the plastic eyes, you can change them every 5 years. The cost is much more higher also because you change them less often, but you have to polish them. Do you say polish?
Polish, yeah.
Polish them every year so that the surface will be smooth. Yeah. Yes? Yes, so that lady asked if we have some special demands, and yes, we have. I will always discuss that with the patient, because he has to be aware that people will be looking at the person even more intensely. But for example, I have a patient, he has naturally brown eyes, and he wants a very blue, very blue eye, and so he has 2 colors, which happens to exist in the real life also. But that's it. Then we have some patients that have quite humor. I like that because it means they accept the situation pretty well, and so I'm very happy to go with them and participate to the jokes. And so, for example, we had a patient asking for just an eye, a globe eye that he could put in his beer when he's going to have a drink with some friends and stuff like that.
I was going to ask you that too, actually.
Yeah. Yes? Sorry, I'm coming. So the cost for a prosthesis, I'm sorry, I can just answer for Switzerland. So the cost of a glass prosthesis in Switzerland is around $750 US dollars, tax-free. Yeah, and you are allowed to change it every year. And for plastic prosthesis, it will be around $3,600, something like that. But again, you can change them every 5 years. I don't know the price in the US. Yeah, there was. Ah, okay. Yes.
Question for Eric. You've seen the Oculus now. Have you used those techniques?
Have I used these techniques in the work that I do? A little bit. We had been doing demonstrations here in support of an exhibit a few years back, Curious and Curiouser, where we had prosthetic eyes displayed at our library. And our team of demonstrators here, we did our best to emulate the process as best we could. So I've used it in that capacity. I've played with it a little bit, not with this glass, but with borosilicate glass also, just to sort of play and see how precise a different composition of glass could get, but haven't really applied it to my own work. Yeah, just to play with. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, that was the demonstration that led me here. A friend of mine, which I would like to thank, so Nicolas, Christol, if you can hear me, because he saw that demonstration, he sent it to me, and I was amazed that someone that is not an ocularist could do such good job. But still, it was not the precision that we use for human beings. And also, I would like to say that because if someone wants to train, you can do it, but please don't make it for humans, because also, would it only be for the glass? Because we work with a very specific glass that is very well tolerated by the humans, which is not the case with some other glasses that will contain more heavy metals.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, how many eyes I make a year? I have around 120 to 150 patients per year. So that's the amount I make of finished. That goes without the bad ones I have to redo. I very often I prepare just the colors and put them aside, so I have models and so on, but I would say maybe 200 a year, yeah.
I'm going to ask a question, because I'm kind of curious. What does a work week look like for you?
Yeah. Okay, so first, I am an artist, and because I couldn't really make a living by being an artist, I had some other job, more paperwork. It was nice, but I was a bit sick of not working with my hands. And so my sister gave the impulse learning with our father, and so I had the same plan than her. And must say that I'm much happier since I work with my hands and not so much with the computer. And discovering glass has gotten really a passion for me, which I didn't think at all when I started. And so I got more interested in other glass techniques. And because I'm not 20 anymore, I cannot see everything I would like to in a lifetime. So I started something that was okay for me. And so on Monday, I have a stained glass course, which I attend to. And it's very interesting for me, yeah, to make that. Then Tuesday will be more paperwork. I make it at the beginning of the week, so it's done. And then on Wednesdays, I will prepare colors, remake prosthesis. And Thursday and Friday, I see patients. So the persons come to me. And on Friday, once every 2 weeks, I move I travel to another city to work. That is something very important to me. Most of the prosthesis, glass eye prosthesis, have always been moving a lot around because we are so few. And it was also like that in my family, and so for me it's important to continue that tradition and travel. Yeah. Yes, up there. Did you get that?
The ball that is attached to the question is
Implant.
yeah, how is the prosthetic attached to the eye socket itself?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, I didn't explain that. There are two cases, or the eye is still there, but because it doesn't see, we have muscles in our eyes, and so if the muscles don't work anymore, they become a bit, not so in tension, and the eye tends to get smaller. In that case, I will put a scleral lens, so one layer of glass, just very on top of the eye. It doesn't hurt. One has to get used a bit to it at the beginning, but it shouldn't hurt. That's one case, and then that's a very good case because the prosthesis is just on top of the eye, and the mobility of the prosthesis is really good. And in the other case, when the eye gets taken out of the orbita, then there will be an implant, as Eric said, and the implant is connected to the 6 muscles we have that make the eye move. And in that case, I come with my double
layer. Yep.
Yeah, and put it over this implant, and it's the same as when the eye is there. It will fit, and the movement is not as good as with the simple scleral lens, but it's still good. And then I also explain to the patients that instead of moving their eyes, they should better move their whole head, so that eyes stay just in front of themselves. Yeah. So that's how the prosthesis is kept behind, but on the front they will be held by the eyelids. Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? All right, I think we'll wrap it up there. Well, thank you so much, Milena Buckel.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Eric, and thank you to the museum. I'm really happy to be here. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you later on the World Wide Web. Thank you.